How invisible I had become in my own marriage. At 6:15 in the morning, I woke to the sound of drawers opening and closing. My husband, Evan, was packing a suitcase with the kind of focus people usually reserve for emergencies. I asked him what he was doing, still half asleep and trying to understand why the day felt wrong before it even began. He did not look at me when he answered. He said he needed space, and that he was going to stay with his friend Caleb for a few days. Then he added something that would stay with me for the rest of my life. He said his friends had been questioning why he was with someone who lacked ambition, someone who was not impressive, someone who was, in their words, not remarkable enough for him. He said the words gently, as if that softness would disguise the weight of them. I felt the sentence hit me in slow motion, settling into the room like cold air. 7 years of marriage reduced to a single judgment: not remarkable enough, a quiet wife who worked from home, a woman who, in his eyes, blended into the background. I sat up on the edge of the bed, trying to keep my voice steady. I asked if this was really what he believed, or if he was just repeating what his friends had said. He shrugged and told me that Serena, a woman I had never even met in person, told him he was too accomplished to stay with someone like me. He said it as if her opinion carried the weight of a professional evaluation, as if the life we had built meant less than a casual remark from across a dinner table. He continued packing. I continued watching, feeling the fall of something I had never fully named. When he finally paused, waiting for a reaction, I told him quietly that before he left, I had something he needed to hear. Something about the work I had been doing, something he had never once asked about. He sighed, thinking I was trying to delay him, but I was doing something else entirely. I was reclaiming space that had never been offered to me, space he did not even know he had taken. And I said it calmly. Evan, you never asked who I really am. Before that morning, if you had asked anyone who knew us, they would have said Evan and I were a steady couple. Not dramatic, not chaotic, just stable in the way people assume a long marriage should be. We met 9 years ago in a small coffee shop in Portland. He was an architectural intern with big dreams and an even bigger belief in what his future could look like. I was working multiple consulting jobs, trying to piece together my own direction. From the start, Evan talked about buildings as if they were living things. He spoke about design with a passion that drew people in, including me. I admired that fire in him. I wanted him to reach the places he imagined, and I never hesitated to support him. When he spent nights drafting proposals for firms that barely remembered his name the next morning, I was the one who brought him food. When rent came due during the first year of his unpaid internships, I was the one who covered it. I told myself this was partnership. This was how two people built a life together. But slowly, in ways that were quiet and almost invisible, the dynamic shifted. Evan began to define success only in terms of titles and public recognition. If something could not be posted, announced, or proudly claimed at work events, he did not see its value. And because much of my work required confidentiality, he assumed it was small, ordinary, background noise in comparison to his world of presentations and project launches. He never asked what my days looked like, never wondered what I spent hours thinking about. I became the steady presence in the background, the one who made sure bills were paid, the one who kept things smooth when his job became stressful. And because I loved him, I let myself fade a little at a time. Looking back, I realized the danger of quiet women in marriages like mine. We shrink to make room for someone else, believing that love means taking up less space, until one day, there is nothing left of us but a shadow standing beside a man who stopped looking long ago. The part Evan never saw, the part he never even thought to ask about, was the life I had been building quietly beside him, not behind his back, not in secrecy out of deceit, but in silence because I learned early on that he only valued things he could measure: titles, salaries, awards, applause. My world did not work that way, and somewhere along the road I stopped offering explanations he never asked for. 3 years earlier, my closest friend from college, Marissa Chen, called me out of the blue. We had been roommates during our freshman year, 2 women who bonded over late-night study sessions, cheap noodles, and the belief that one day we would do something meaningful. Marissa was working as a cybersecurity analyst, brilliant in a way that made companies nervous until they realized how much they needed her. She told me she had an idea. She said the tech world was full of disasters waiting to happen: data breaches, internal scandals, executives making decisions that could implode entire companies. She believed there was room for a team that could handle the chaos precisely and quietly. a firm that companies could call when everything fell apart. She wanted me to build it with her. I remember sitting on the couch that night while Evan talked for 40 minutes straight about a new project at his firm. I listened the way I always did, smiling, encouraging him, proud of how energized he sounded, but inside something shifted. For the first time in a long while, I felt my own pulse, my own ambition that I had let sleep under the weight of being his emotional support structure. So Marissa and I launched Brooks Chen Strategies, just the two of us, no fancy office, no public announcements. Our clients came through referrals, companies too embarrassed to let the world know they needed rescue. We worked 12-hour days, handling crises most people would never hear about. Our invoices were high, our results fast, and our confidentiality absolute. In our first year, we cleared $300,000. By year 2, nearly $1 million. By year 3, companies were calling us before they called their boards. All of this happened while Evan assumed I spent my days doing small freelance tasks from the apartment. He never asked why I had client calls at midnight. He never wondered why I kept buying new equipment. He never questioned how we managed bills so easily during his slow months. He never asked because he had already decided the category he believed I belonged in. And I stayed silent because sometimes it is easier to let someone believe a small story than to force them to see the truth they are not ready for. The turning point came 6 months before that morning in Seattle. Marissa and I were already deep into several high-profile crisis cases when we were approached by 2 different corporations. Both were major players in the tech world, the kind whose names appeared in headlines weekly, and whose executives spoke at global conferences. They wanted to buy our firm. At first, I thought it was a mistake. We had no public profile, no flashy marketing, not even a proper website. But that was precisely what made us valuable. We operated in the shadows, fixing disasters quietly, leaving no trace. To companies drowning in controversy, that kind of invisibility was worth millions. The offers came with non-disclosure requirements so strict that even mentioning them to Evan would have violated the agreements. I told myself I would share everything once the negotiations settled. But in truth, a deeper fear sat beneath that decision. I knew Evan. I knew the way he measured himself against the world. And I knew how threatened he would feel knowing his wife was building something bigger than anything he had imagined for himself. Marissa and I spent weeks reviewing contracts, consulting lawyers, calculating the long-term consequences. The numbers were so large they felt unreal. Eventually, one offer stood out, a buyout worth $18.5 million, with a provision that Marissa and I would stay on as executive partners with full operational control. My share would be $11.2 million. When the final documents arrived for signature, I remember sitting at my desk, staring at my name on the contract, feeling both proud and terrified. Proud of the work we had done, terrified of what this would mean at home. That night, Evan came home angry about a design pitch that had been rejected. He talked for an hour about how underappreciated he felt, about how his firm did not recognize his potential, about how he deserved better. I listened without interrupting, as I always had. He never once asked about my day. He never noticed the contract sitting half-tucked under my notebook. He never wondered why my hands were still shaking. I signed the acquisition papers the next morning while Evan was at work, and for the first time in our marriage, I felt like I was stepping into a future that belonged entirely to me. I just did not know how quickly that future would collide with the man who never truly saw me at all. After Evan walked out that morning with his suitcase, something inside me settled into place. Not anger. Not heartbreak. Just clarity. I finally understood that the version of me he had loved was a quiet outline, a supporting character who made his world easier. Now that he believed I was not remarkable enough, he was willing to reconsider our entire marriage. That realization changed something fundamental in me. The first thing I did was call Marissa. She answered on the second ring, already sensing something was wrong. When I told her what happened, she was silent for a moment before asking one simple question. What do you want to do now? For the first time in years, I chose myself. I contacted an attorney, a woman named Dana Whitmore, known for handling complex financial separations. I brought her every document I had saved: contracts, invoices, bank transfers. She listened carefully, flipping through the pages with practiced precision. When she finished, she looked at me with an expression I had not expected. Respect. She told me I had protected myself well, even without realizing it. and she told me I had every right to move forward without guilt. But there was one last thing I needed to do before stepping out of the life Evan and I built. His birthday was coming in 10 days. Months earlier, I had reserved a private dining room at an upscale restaurant in downtown Seattle. It was supposed to be a surprise celebration. Now it would be something else entirely. I modified the reservation from a dinner for 2 to a table for 12. I invited the friends whose opinions Evan valued more than his marriage. Caleb, Rowan, Harper, Serena, the same people who had discussed how he deserved someone more impressive than me. I was not seeking revenge. I was seeking truth. I wanted them to see the version of me that Evan had never bothered to ask about. And I wanted Evan to understand, clearly and quietly, that invisibility was a choice I would no longer make. So I prepared, not for a confrontation but for a new beginning. A beginning where I no longer apologized for taking up space in my own life. The night of Evan's birthday arrived with an early spring chill. The sky over Seattle was a soft, pale blue fading into dusk, the kind of evening that usually made the city feel quiet and reflective. But inside the private dining room at the restaurant, the air carried a different kind of tension, one built from truth waiting to surface. I arrived 15 minutes early. The room was warm, lined with soft lighting and tall windows that overlooked the waterfront. A long table sat in the center, set with polished silverware and deep blue napkins folded with careful symmetry. In the corner stood a small projector and screen equipment I requested without explanation. The restaurant staff asked no questions. They simply prepared the space exactly as I had asked. One by one, Evan's friends began to arrive. Harper walked in first, dressed sharply as always. She greeted me politely but with a subtle confusion in her eyes. Caleb entered next, followed by Rowan, then Serena. Each offered a mixture of surprise and polite smiles, clearly wondering why I had invited them. They all believed this dinner was meant to celebrate Evan. In a way, it still was, just not in the way they expected. When Evan finally stepped into the room, he froze. He had not spoken to me since the morning he packed his suitcase. He looked from me to his friends, then back at me again, realizing this was not the intimate birthday dinner he had imagined. I gestured toward the empty seat at the head of the table. He sat cautiously, confusion tightening the lines around his eyes. Dinner began quietly, the clinking of glasses, the soft hum of servers entering and leaving, the polite small talk. Evan tried to act composed, but the stiffness in his shoulders betrayed him. He kept glancing at the projector, then at me, waiting for an explanation. Halfway through the meal, when plates were being cleared, I stood. "Thank you all for coming tonight. I know this is not the celebration you expected, but there are things I need to share, and I wanted the people who influence Evan most to hear them as well." The room fell silent. I walked to the projector and clicked to the first slide. A simple title appeared. Brooks Chen Strategies. Crisis Management and Corporate Restoration. Rowan frowned. Serena whispered something under her breath. Caleb leaned forward. "This is the company I founded with my business partner, Marissa. For the past 3 years, we have handled large-scale corporate crises for tech companies across the country. Because our work demands confidentiality, I have never talked about it publicly." Another click. The screen showed revenue charts, anonymized case summaries, business growth. "And this year we accepted a buyout offer." The acquisition contract appeared on the screen. Then the number. $18,500,000. I continued speaking evenly. "My share is $11.2 million. The transfer was completed 3 weeks ago." Every person at the table stared at the screen in stunned silence. Harper covered her mouth. Caleb blinked hard, as if trying to reprocess the past 7 years. Evan sat completely still. Then I changed to the next slide, bank statements, payment transfers, the quiet contributions I had made. This is the part Evan never asked about, the rent I covered during his unpaid internships, the networking events I paid for, the equipment he bought with money I transferred when he was short, the months I filled the gaps in his income when work slowed. I looked directly at him. "I never kept score. But you did. You measured my worth by how loud my ambitions sounded, not by what they accomplished." The room remained frozen. Finally, I said the words I had carried for so long. "You told your friends I was not remarkable. But the truth is, Evan, you never looked closely enough to see who I really was." I closed the presentation gently, not with triumph, but with release. "This dinner is my final gift to you. A clear picture. No arguments, no secrets, just the truth you never asked for. And with that, I picked up my coat and walked toward the door, leaving Evan and his friends in the silence of a truth that could no longer be ignored. I woke up the next morning to a quiet apartment, the kind of quiet that feels like a clean break rather than an absence. The dinner had ended without shouting, without accusations, without the dramatic chaos people expect when a marriage collapses, but the silence that followed carried its own kind of aftermath. I made coffee and sat by the kitchen window, watching the early light stretch across the city. For the first time in years, I felt a stillness in my chest that wasn't numbness. It was clarity, a door closing without slamming. My phone buzzed at 8:30. A message from Serena. Then another from Harper. Then a missed call from Caleb. I didn't respond. I already knew what they wanted to say. At 10, Serena called again. This time I answered. Her voice shook the moment I picked up. Lena, I need to apologize. She sounded nothing like the confident woman who had once told Evan he was too accomplished to stay with someone like me. She told me that after I left the restaurant, the group sat in stunned silence for nearly 20 minutes. No one knew what to say. They eventually moved outside, where the truth finally hit them. Caleb asked Evan why he had never mentioned the work I did. Rowan asked how he could talk about being the primary provider when I had quietly filled the financial gaps for years. Harper, who rarely showed emotion, told him that partner or not, he owed me respect. Evan broke down, right there on the sidewalk, not out of remorse for how he treated me, but because the image he had carefully built in their eyes was shattered. He was embarrassed, exposed, deflated in the one space where he valued validation most. Serena whispered, it was like he only realized your worth when he saw how small it made him look for ignoring it. I thanked her for telling me. I told her I didn't hold resentment, but I also didn't need any of them to defend me now. That part of my life had already ended. Later that afternoon, the first article about the acquisition went live, a quiet, factual piece in a business journal. Within hours, it was shared across LinkedIn, circulated in tech groups, reposted by executives who had known our work, but never known our names. People congratulated us. Clients reached out. Reporters asked for interviews. Evan sent an email late that night, a long one. Apologies, explanations, regrets. I read it once, slowly. Then I closed the laptop without replying. I wasn't interested in stitching together something that had unraveled long before the truth ever came out. I had already stepped into a life that no longer required his permission to be remarkable. The days that followed moved faster than anything I had anticipated. The acquisition story spread quietly at first, circulating mostly within professional networks, but soon it widened into a broader conversation. People were fascinated by how a small, discreet crisis management firm had operated behind the scenes of major tech companies. They were even more fascinated that two women had built it from the ground up without a public footprint. I received invitations to speak on podcasts, participate in panels, and contribute to articles. At first I hesitated. I had spent years operating in silence, and stepping into a public space felt foreign. But with each conversation I realized how much I had been holding back. Not just about my work, but about myself. For so long I had eased my voice into softer tones so Evan could fill the room. Now, without that weight, my voice returned to its natural volume. During one interview, the host asked why I'd stayed quiet for so long. The question lingered in the air for a moment before I answered. I told her that it was not silence out of fear. It was silence out of habit. When you are consistently told, directly or indirectly, that your story is secondary, you start to believe it. You shrink yourself because it seems easier than fighting to stay seen. The interview resonated with thousands of women. Messages poured in from people who had spent years folding themselves into smaller shapes so others could shine. Some wrote that they had stopped pursuing dreams because their partners dismissed them. Others said they had lost themselves in marriages that praised their support but never their strength. These messages humbled me. They reminded me that my story was not just about a failing marriage or a big acquisition. It was about the countless ways people disappear inside relationships, workplaces, and families, and how powerful it can be to step back into the light. Amid all of this, I kept working with Marissa. Our company expanded under its new ownership. New teams were hired. New offices opened. For the first time, I felt fully aligned with the work I was doing and the person I was becoming. Not because I had something to prove, but because I no longer felt the need to hide. A few months passed, and life settled into a rhythm that felt both unfamiliar and deeply right. I moved into a new apartment overlooking Lake Union, a space filled with morning light and quiet corners where I could read, work, or simply breathe without feeling the weight of someone else's expectations pressing in on me. It was the first home I had chosen entirely for myself. Work was thriving. Marissa and I were traveling more, meeting with new partners, hiring teams with specialties we had once only dreamed of incorporating. Our company, once run from a dining table and a shared laptop, now occupied 2 full floors of an office building. Seeing our logo on the glass doors the first day nearly brought me to tears. It was a confirmation of something I had always known deep down but seldom acknowledged: I was capable of building something extraordinary. Evan tried to reach out again. The first message came a month after the dinner, then another, and another. He apologized for not seeing me, for believing the easy version of who he thought I was, for letting his friends' opinions carry more weight than the reality of our marriage. His final email said that he hoped we could meet for coffee, that he wanted closure. I never responded, not out of cruelty but because I had already closed that chapter. There was nothing left to salvage. The silence between us was no longer a wound. It was simply distance, neutral and necessary. One evening I spoke at a leadership conference. The room was filled with women from different industries: finance, tech, healthcare, education. After my talk, someone in the audience asked a question that stayed with me. How did you know it was time to walk away? I answered honestly. I said that I realized a relationship should make you larger, not smaller. That love should expand your world, not compress it. And that the moment you feel yourself disappearing to keep the peace, something fundamental has already broken. When the event ended, dozens of people came up to share their own stories. I listened, grateful, humbled, reminded again and again that invisibility is rarely chosen, it is learned. And it can be unlearned too. I walked out of the venue that night feeling lighter than I had in years, not because of success, not because of recognition, but because I finally felt like a whole person again. In the months that followed, life began to feel grounded in a way I had never experienced before. Not rushed, not hidden, just steady and honest. I no longer built my days around the comfort of someone who had never really seen me. Instead, I built them around clarity, purpose, and the quiet confidence that grows when you finally step into the fullness of who you are. One Saturday morning, I walked along the waterfront with a cup of tea, watching boats drift across the lake. The breeze was cool, the sun gentle, the city waking up slowly around me. For the first time in a long time, I felt completely present. No second-guessing myself. No shrinking to make room for someone else's ego. Just me standing fully in my own life. I thought about the version of myself from a year earlier, the one who apologized for taking up space, who dimmed her accomplishments to avoid making her partner feel insecure. I wished I could wrap my arms around that woman and tell her she was never the problem. She was never too quiet or too gentle or too unremarkable. She was simply unrecognized by someone who lacked the depth to truly see her. What I learned is simple, but it took years to understand. You cannot convince someone to value you. You cannot perform your way into being seen. And you should never shrink yourself to protect someone from confronting their own insecurities. A healthy partnership is not built on one person fading so the other can shine. It is built on 2 people who lift each other higher, who celebrate each other's strengths, who ask, who listen, who see. My journey was not about revenge. It was about returning to myself. It was about stepping out of the shadows I had learned to live in and remembering that my worth was never meant to be hidden. If Lena's story has touched you, if it reminded you of your own strength or your own quiet truths, take a moment now. Like this video, share it with someone who needs it, and tell me in the comments. When was the moment you realized